The mounds to me is very special. It's home for American Indians because we all know that the mounds are sacred. They're, they're burial grounds.
Big purpose of a lot of archaeology is to understand what the environment was like in the past.
And I believe this is where a lot of the people is where their ancestors laid. This is their final resting place, and it was a monument that's kind of built to them.
1,000 years ago, what is now known as Cahokia Mounds represented one of the largest cities in the world. Today, we will follow the trail of evidence left behind to try to discover what was here and if the pursuit of the past is destroying the spirit of this remarkable place.
Downtown Cahokia, you'd see houses everywhere. You would see, and these are houses made out of wattle and daub with thatch roofs because that's the material that's available to them. You would see people walking everywhere. You'd see people who live here, and you would also see people coming in to trade. I'm sure people coming in to make religious pilgrimages. So this place would be full of people. I think you'd have the same reaction if you were a Native American who lived 100 miles from here and you came to visit. I think you'd have the same reaction that a local kid has when they go to New York City for the first time. Like, wow, look at all the people, look at the big buildings. It would have been a hubbub of activity.
Based on archaeological discoveries, it is believed that as many as 20,000 Native Americans live in ancient Cahokia, a community planted firmly in the fertile flatlands that were rich in natural resources.
Very rich for farming, for hunting, for fishing, and so I think it's the natural base that begins it allows for Cahokia to be built here. Corn is definitely, maize is the fuel that feeds Cahokia. But then I think something happens here around 1,000 years ago that Cahokia takes off and becomes the big city. It becomes the center of what was the center of the world for those people. Economics is an important part of it because you've got trade going up and down the Mississippi River, you've got the Illinois River coming in, and the Missouri River coming into our north. So this is a natural trade route, and I think East St. Louis was probably like the hub of that trade route. But I think Cahokia then becomes, if you think of these as sister cities, if you will, I think then Cahokia becomes the religious and ritual center. This is where people, there's certainly religious rituals going on at East St. Louis and St. Louis. We know Cahokia had something like 120 mounds built here. Monk's Mound is just the biggest and most obvious. There were like 120 mounds here. There were another 50 at East St. Louis. There were like another 25 over in St. Louis. So there were clearly religious rituals going on there too, but this is the religious center here.
What do you think?
I think it's definitely the 5/8.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
During the summer of 2012, students from Southern Illinois University Edwardsville helped collect and record types of soils found in what is an area believed to be an ancient suburb of Cahokia. Then, an archaeologist will use a measuring tool that sends infrared beams to different locations, creating a map of a village called the Gering Site.
1,000 years ago, Cahokia was a really big city, and the Gering site here would have been a small farming village. And what they grew here probably ended up feeding the people at Cahokia. Here, for example, we're right next to Cahokia Creek, and this in prehistoric times was a fairly major stream that led straight down to Cahokia, which is only just a few miles away from here, the big mound site and big city of Cahokia. We don't know exactly where Cahokia Creek was 1,000 years ago, so part of the soil coring that we've done off to the west portion of the site is to figure out where Cahokia Creek was 1,000 years ago, and then we want to understand where it was 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago for the entire occupation of the site.
The creek is significant because archaeologists believe it served as a prehistoric highway to Cahokia. At Cahokia, much of the focus is on Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in North America. It is believed the Cahokia chief lived on top of the mound, but archaeologists spend most of their time searching for clues around it.
And you've got a west face over here that's sloping down. You've got the north face going down, draping over the slope. You've got an east face. It's not quite as accentuated, and then you've got a south face back over where your car is. That's the corner of a house. That's the floor level. This is the level that they're living on. And then everything above that is filled. This is part of a mound here. This is the mound that goes up there. And then all of that above this comes from out in front, and that's what they were adding to the bank to go out. So it's just a whole bunch of different things. What you've got here is topsoil, probably from underneath the mound before it was constructed. And so they're basically removing that topsoil and some of the underlying sediments, the lighter material there, and then it's being thrown, after the house is abandoned, it's being thrown over the edge. So,
inside these homes, scientists take soil samples, hoping to find clues in the different layers that will tell them when the houses were built and what the environment was like. The discoveries are then analyzed in laboratories.
This is a Mississippian pottery sherd made in this area, in Cahokia, and if this were found 500 miles away, the archaeologists would look at the style of the sherd and say, oh, it looks like this was made at Cahokia. What this is an infrared microscope, which allows us to look at the molecular structure.
right now we have a very good understanding of the framework we're working in, particularly the time part of it. We know that the initial settlement here started at the beginning of the 11th century. We can document these major changes during the course of that history, and then we know that it was basically abandoned before the end of the 14th century.
But many Native Americans believe Cahokia is sacred, and the digging here disturbs spirits that should be left in peace.
This is a burial place, first and foremost. And from my own perspective on that, this is a pretty sacred area.
You know, you don't need to keep digging. We know things are there, and they're probably basically all the same, to keep going with it. And, you know, to me, I don't like it. You know, it just leave them alone. They, you know, we know they're here. You know, why can't we protect them like any other piece of property that the government, you know, claims?
We take great pain to try and not disturb, particularly things like burials. There's specific guidelines. We do not disturb burials if we encounter them. Other aspects is trying to minimize, we try not to work on the mounds for that very reason. That's one of the reasons that we're excavating on a slope that's been built up by them as part of a construction activity. Even under those kind of conditions, there's still very real concerns about what we do. I wouldn't go back on what I've done. I think that was part of the journey, was to experience that. I know the one thing that I think is critical now, and particularly being in a metropolitan area, is to make sure the other sites, particularly the other towns with mounds and the burial mounds and cemeteries, are protected.
Decades ago, mounds were destroyed, and some of the ones located outside the 2,200-acre Cahokia site are still threatened. That's why education may be our greatest tool in the effort to honor and protect what is here. The Cahokia Mounds Interpretive Center tells the story through a series of exhibits that allow guests to see the tools used 1,000 years ago.
We have to find twin mounds, guys. We've got questions about it.
Don't we do like it's our culture, or not our,
Like our
culture.
history.
Yeah,
Our history,
our
yeah.
history.
How they like lived and stuff, like how they lived before our time.
How they hunted and how they got their food and their clothes. How they made that.
They put a lot of time into their town and that they probably liked a lot.
We don't know why they left. Did severe drought force them to move? Or was it something else?
We have so much evidence from this area. From, Cahokia itself, I think something less than 5% of it's been excavated. But there are so many sites in this area that are related to Cahokia, and with all the highway work going on and all the other construction related to building going on with that, that there are archaeological sites being excavated virtually all the time in this area. So we have, from that scientific sense, we have a great data set that we have, not just information from Cahokia, but from all the villages that, not all the villages, but from some of the villages that supported Cahokia. So, we know what they ate. We know what they were trading. We have a pretty good idea of what their everyday lives were like. We know quite a bit about their kind of spiritual view of the world based upon our understandings of more recent Native Americans. So there's just a lot of information there.
Now, centuries later, we are still discovering important parts of this amazing story, rebuilding one of America's great civilizations, piece by piece.